Good evening. My name's Abby Ferretti. I'm a principal with Partners for Economic Solutions. I'm a Washington, D.C.-based consulting firm. And tonight I'm just going to talk a little bit about retail. And then when I'm done talking, you're going to see me run as fast as I can to my car and drive to my house so that I can see my son graduate. So you all forgive me if I'm not here to respond to questions, but you have a very capable panel where I can respond to a lot of it. And if there's a question somebody can't get to, write it down, and it'll be something that we make sure that we get into that written document at the end. And thanks again for opening your community to us. So when we look at Irvington as a commercial district, I always start with an overview of regionally where it sits. So on this map, you see the star showing Irvington, which is a star neighborhood. Everybody remember that. We are the star. And what we have here is a good environment in terms of the housing stock. We have homeownership and rental. We have key automobile accessibility, although there are folks that don't have cars, and they're well served by bus. This is important because I look at the regional retail competition. So I say, well, if I want to go buy a dress, where can I go? Other than the thrift store and soon to be open Family Dollar, I can travel to what are considered malls or regional shopping centers. I have some folks, some signs up here of Security Square. If I need to go grocery shopping, I can find my way to a grocery store, either on a bus line or via a private vehicle. And these are kind of options and places that I can go to. Whether they're great options or substandard ones, they're competition. Anytime you have competition that exists in the marketplace, it is easier to go there than to create new from the onset. What we need to do is identify what are the local market opportunities. So I have this basic list that I like to show to communities. These are the things that you can get met. These are the retail needs that are very common to find in neighborhood service retail. This is where you can go to get your food. This is where you can go to get your Band-Aids. This is where you go to get your haircut, your services met, and to some degree, down the corridor of the entire area that we looked at, get your car repaired as well, would be a category like that, your laundry, these things. These are things that we would expect to have in a neighborhood, and they can be redundant, means there can be more than one of them. They can be in the regional place, and they can also be close by to you. So when we look at the corridor, all these red dots, and I may miss one or two, because like Brad said, we're working these long 14-hour days, but these are the red dots along Frederick Avenue, where you currently have a retail business. What you'll notice if you look at these red dots is that there's two main clusters, and then there's some outliers, which may not be in commercially zoned areas, and there's also some interruptions to the space. And I put two images down here of a nonprofit user and a residential multifamily that are kind of interrupting your retail flow in your space. These are your existing conditions. This is what any retailer who's considering reinvestment would go in and take a look at, just what's going on the ground. It's not really bad or good. The perhaps strongest characteristic here is that you do have a cluster in the center, in the core, and we're going to talk about reinforcing that. What you don't have in the market is just those conditions, but you have other conditions. And that is you have concerns about safety and about the cleanliness of the environment. Whether or not I could give you millions and millions of dollars of demand, if you still have an issue where there is a perception of safety, the hours that the businesses will operate is impacted. The amount of dollars that people are willing to spend here when they have alternate locations to go to is impacted. Because these things are impacted, your demand, however high it could be, goes elsewhere. And you know this because if I'm going to ask you where you go grocery shopping most frequently for your large items, you're going to mention places outside the area, or you're going to mention tailors. You're going to mention options that are not necessarily local because you know that that competition is real, it exists, and because the safety is a factor. So I always tell people without clean and safe, it doesn't matter what you do, it needs to be well maintained for people to spend that money there. So the other thing that happens when you're making a decision about attracting retail and getting retail to change is folks look at who are the other businesses are here. So if I know I have a competitor there, maybe I do want to locate because that at least means that people are coming into this environment and they're purchasing the same type of good or a similar good, and I can maybe get that person. But you guys here in Irvington, although you're a star, you have a lot of liquor stores. You have a lot of redundancy in your retail offerings. Your retail offerings should really reflect what those customers' basic needs are. Those 2 columns I gave of those basic needs, your food needs, getting your Band-Aids, those pieces, getting your hair cut, getting your car fixed, getting your clothes washed. Right now, you have too much redundancy, so you're not able to do that in the marketplace. And then finally, we have sort of the piece that everybody asks me about when I stand up and talk about retail, which is, I'm a customer and this is what I want. I want a place where I can get my nails done. I want a place where I can walk to, that I can sit down and have a meal and chat with a neighbor. I want a place where I can look at the internet and also have some coffee. These are things that folks want, and this is what a retailer's response to that is. I want you to meet every single one of these criteria first before I will consider your location. So I want to know that you have enough population within my trade area. I want to know that your household median income is strong enough. I want to know that you have parking that's easily accessible and visible for my customer base. I want it to be walkable. I want it to be an appropriate mix of retailers, not a preponderance of liquor stores or other things. These are all of the things, and I'm just giving you a bird's eye view of what they consider when a retailer locates there. And so what you have to do is overcome what might be a check in your box. Residential population, check. You guys have probably sufficient residential population to get many new and different types of retail that you don't have today. And check, you have a high enough median household income, close to $40,000, to get many of those gaps that we looked at in those 2 lists. But now, you don't have good building conditions. The conditions of those buildings, although they're historic and older, haven't been maintained. They're not up to code. They don't provide a warm, fuzzy shell for a nice retailer to go into, so that's an obstacle. You don't have walkability because it's not as safe. So, oops, there's another obstacle that we put in their place. So, remembering that there's a balance between these 2 things, we always like to say, okay, so we know that a coffee shop, for example, has their criteria, and I'm going through this as an example. And they want you to have a certain population. They want you to have 10,000 or more folks within 1 to 2 miles. You guys have that. Check. Your average household income, $40,000 or more. You have that. Check. Your traffic count, they want it to be higher than what you currently have, which is 14,300 average daily trips. Okay, so we didn't meet that threshold. And if I'm making that decision to locate here, all of a sudden, that X in that box creates a barrier. So what we do is we look at incentives and sites that are available, and we turn to what is the star of this community in Irvington, and that is the local entrepreneur. And so I think what's really important to see is that those barriers are something we have to start with, understand, address, and right in the center of that say, what's one of our solutions? A local entrepreneur could be that solution. But who's your partner for that local entrepreneur? And I would suggest that you look to Baltimore Development Corporation as one of the first places to start. BDC has a terrific microloan program. It's funding for a local entrepreneur. It is available, and here's an example of where they went in and did a sandwich shop, something that I think could be terrific in your community. And they support it. It's a local entrepreneur, so you end up getting more traction, more customer base. I want to go back, I want to support that business person. They're an Irvington entrepreneur. And you also have other programs you can couple with it. Just a facade program. Just purchasing signage and cleaning up your windows can cost over $3,000 in some of these older structures. So why not take advantage of these programs? Both of these 2 programs here that I mentioned are relatively easy to come into. They're low documentation. There is a BDC staff person, Dave Garza, who's sitting right back there and raising his hand and waving it to all of you, who would be willing to walk you through the process. It's not overly burdensome, but it's also a way to sort of kickstart and get things moving. So again, when you think about who we're attracting as those businesses and we run into a stumbling block, a barrier, we want to think of an alternative path to get us to the same end goal along this business corridor. Now, there are 2 other key things that or 3 that I pointed to at the end of the retail discussion. One is the enforcement of non-conforming users. You have retail in inappropriate spaces. That retail will never be able to flourish and do as well as it could do if it was in a retail appropriate space. That can be the location, that can be the size of the building, that can be the zoning, it can be any one of those things. And when it's non-conforming, it's going to run into barriers. So it either needs to be moved, shifted to another location within the area, or over time, filled in with more retail around it so it has a surviving chance to thrive. That retail has that best opportunity when it's surrounded by other retailers and it's able to cluster itself together. And then I think finally Brad touched on this, and we started with sort of the key about organizing. You need that organization that's going to address this larger overarching issue to have a strong merchant voice. You need a single-minded voice that's talking as a member of the business community. Well, it is great that we have Dorothy, and she's wonderful. We need someone from the business merchant side to step up and take on that ombudsman role. Someone who's going to be enthusiastic about the marketing, who's going to be that point of contact, who understands the hours and operations of the business merchants that are there and those that we're attracting, and can work hand in hand with what Dorothy and other members of the civic associations are doing, but is specifically for the merchants themselves. So I think focusing Irvington on these two sections that Brad mentioned in red, this is a very small area. I'm not asking you to go all the way down here and all the way to the other areas, because this is where the critical amount of attention, focus, and effort needs to happen over the next 3 to 5 years to prepare this area for transition so that we can attract these new retail tenants in that period of time. I'm going to skedaddle, as I promised before, but I'm going to turn it right over to Paul as I head out, and thank you again.